that they should be living for. Because people today don't have a clear understanding of their purpose. This is why they're susceptible to destructive influences. Why they get tempted by drugs or get involved with immoral sexual activities or criminal activities. Because they do not understand. They have no clear idea about the purpose of their life. This is what Father is saying to us, and through the principle we can understand what is the purpose of our life. And not just for our life on earth, but finally it's the foundation for our life in the spiritual world. We can understand the proper way to fulfill our purpose. So through talking about the 3 life goals, we're not saying 3 blessings like the principle says, but we're saying basically the same thing. We're trying to convey to people, what is the purpose of life? What should you be living for? And if you understand this and you pursue this, you can find fulfillment. You can find the happiness that you're looking for by doing this. So today people are seeking for happiness in very direct ways, very self-centered ways ultimately. Wanting happiness, thinking that they get happiness by receiving, by possessing something. But we can understand the true way to happiness is by pursuing these 3 life goals, which means to give of yourself, to become a person that lives for the sake of others, creates a better reality around you, multiplies love. This is the way to really achieve happiness. So I want to end with a quote from Helen Keller, who's a famous American author and humanitarian. She was blind and deaf at a very young age. She had some disease and she became blind and deaf, so she was cut off from the world around her. These 2 senses, our sight and our ears, that we depend upon to relate with the world around us. She was cut off. But incredibly, she could overcome this incredible limitation. And not simply to survive in life, but to become truly a person that really lived for the sake of others and was able to impact many, many people's lives, not only in America, but throughout the world. So through her own experience, she came to understand this statement, that real happiness is not gained through self-gratification, but through fidelity to a worthy purpose. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Baby. You like Mooney jokes? Maybe Moonies don't joke, they're too serious, huh? One time in America, in the midst of all the negativity in the mid-70s and the early 80s, Father was really feeling, wow, this is too much. Every day they're writing such negative stuff about me. I'm the Messiah and the true parent, why can they write such nonsense? And so he called up his PR department. He said, okay, I want to prove to everybody that I'm really from God. So what he did, he told the PR department, okay, tell all the media, next Monday morning, 5 a.m., I'm going to walk on the Hudson River. Like Jesus walked on the water, I'm going to walk on the Hudson River. And they're going to see that, and they'll have it on TV and newspapers, and who can deny him, who can say I'm not from God? So, everybody was so busy, and all the TV people were so excited because they thought, well, let's watch Moon drown, huh? And so even they had their morning talk shows live from underwater at the Hudson River. They were swimming under the water waiting for Father to come down. So really they were thinking, wow, this is a big chance to show how Moon is and what we say. So then Father showed up. Father, when he comes, Father's a very special way of greeting, if I'll show you. Father started greeting us. Big smile, and very wholehearted. Huh? And all the media were saying, hi, Moon. And then they were really looking forward to seeing him go under. And everybody was excited. Father got down to the river, and the whole of America was watching on TV. You know? And they thought, okay, he puts his foot in the water and he's going to sink. Right? Amazing, amazing. He walked on the water. His shoes weren't even wet. He walked across the water. And walked back. Actually, he ran back. And then, bye, everybody. And he went back to his garden. And he thought, no, they've got to believe I'm from God. If they don't believe I'm from God, you know, they're crazy, these Americans. So next morning, he talked to Reverend Kwok. He said, Reverend Kwok, bring me a copy of the New York Times. I want to see what their headline is today. So they brought the New York Times. Big headline, Moon cannot swim. So, you can't win with the media, can you? Want to hear another Mooney joke? This is after lunch, I have to keep you guys awake. How does a thief, you know, a mugger, a person who robs a person right on the street for their money, how do they recognize they've just robbed a Mooney? They're going to ask for a receipt. Right? It's true, we're very conscientious about these things, right? Public money is very important. Anyway, there's a few more of those, I'll tell you later. So, since it's after lunch, I felt I should say something to get your attention, get your focus back here again. So, actually the lecture I'm about to give is quite serious. So, in usual IEF lectures, there is no such title, Love and Sexuality in the Age of AIDS. But what I'm doing here is combining two lectures together. So sometimes, and that's the wonderful thing about PowerPoint, you have a particular audience or a particular situation, you can even put a new title sometimes. And you give the title which is suitable to that audience or whatever. So that's a great thing. Once you have PowerPoint, you have incredible flexibility. And you can then take slides from different lectures and build a new lecture suitable to that audience. Sometimes, or oftentimes, we are limited by time or other constraints. Therefore, we need sometimes to be very flexible, very adjustable. And PowerPoint really is sent from heaven for that purpose. So I want to talk about the issue of the problem of, how people are dealing with the issue of love and sexuality in this time. When we have a plague called AIDS spread throughout the world. The reason that we have come to this point right now in history is because, we went through what is commonly known as the sexual revolution in America particularly, and in the West in general, where people began to question all the norms surrounding issues of sexuality. So before, out of a sense of shame, people often simply behaved properly, not necessarily because they were saints, but simply they felt there was a social stigma attached to any kind of violations in this area. So they felt it was a shameful thing to violate sexual norms. And that changed. People just forgot all about that. Also, one of the consequences of the sexual revolution was that it contributed to grave social and health and social problems. In other words, today we are reaping the fruit of these violations. So what I want to talk about here is health and social problems in part one. Health and social problems associated with the promiscuous sexual behavior which developed at the time of the sexual revolution. And they were huge social problems. And I think it's important that we understand this. Now I'll be talking about many issues which come from America, from American experience. But you in your countries can also analyze the situation in your own country and use statistics from your own country. You can still use the ones from America. The reason being is that trends, things that happen in America often are repeated sometime later in other countries. So in a way, America is like a warning, don't do this, don't go this way. And often young people, they like many things about America, whether it's Hollywood or freedom or many things. And they're often trying to go there or to copy American behavior. So it's important that we can use the lessons America has learned, hopefully, for helping other countries. And so But at the same time, you should be aware in your country what is the real situation. In some countries actually it's very hard to get accurate statistics. They're not well kept, or they're kept secret or something. So it's hard to get accurate. But there's ways through UN AIDS, for example, to find out a lot of information. And they have a special a way of analyzing situations, social situations in different countries, including the issue of AIDS and STDs. So then you can make your own slide. Because sometimes it's really important to wake people up, you know? Today I told you Russia has the most rapidly expanding AIDS problem in the world. Maybe many of you didn't know that. Russia has one of the highest murder rates in the world also. Has one of the highest prison population in the world. Every year in Russia, 30,000 people are murdered. And almost half of that are women who are victims. That's the highest ratio of men-women in the world. And it's associated with alcoholism or drug abuse. So we have to wake up, you know, the country, because oftentimes the government or people, they just hide or don't want to acknowledge the problem because it makes them look bad. But we have to understand face to face what is the real situation in this country or any other country. And then get their attention. So one of the things that we should try to do with this kind of lecture is really shock people, you know, wake them up. Actually, Father said we should scare people with the issue of AIDS, not for the sake of making them depressed, but for them really realizing sexual promiscuity is wrong, and it'll physically kill you, not to mention where you will go in the spirit world. If because of hearing this lecture somebody changes their life, they can avoid hell in the spirit world. That already is a good thing. So we should really strongly, you know, shake people awake when we give lectures like this. You have to get their attention. Then once you get their attention, then you can guide them about what is the real meaning of love and sexuality. So the main focus actually of this kind of lecture should not be giving a whole explanation of how AIDS comes, how it's spread, what the medical reasoning is, and this and that, and listing off all the sexual diseases. That's not the main purpose. The UN can do that, or NGOs can do that. What is our main purpose? It's to teach a new philosophy about love and sexuality. That is our main goal. We're not medical experts, we're not disease experts, but we should awaken people to the dangers, but then give them hope, give them vision of what it should be like. What is the true meaning of love, the true meaning of sexuality, and then save them from all these kinds of problems. So for example, in the States, this is how things turned out after the sexual revolution in terms of the increasing numbers of girls between the ages of 15 and 19 contracting sexually transmitted diseases of various kinds. Now, I should mention one thing. These lectures that we're giving are abbreviated, means they're shorter than usual because of time. And in this case, it's 2 lectures into one. So I would suggest that although you can take notes and so on and use this as a basis, you should also get yourself a copy of the full lecture series. They will be available afterwards, okay? So please use that so that when you learn how to use this one, then later you can expand your lecturing abilities to include the whole thing. Because we're not covering all the lectures here, and even the lectures we are covering are not complete. So for example here, it talks about the kind of consequences for American girls. I told you before, tens of thousands of American girls, by the age of 20, they understand they will never have their own baby. Never. They've lost their chance forever to hold their own baby in their arms because of a sexual disease. And mostly they cannot marry because the husband doesn't want to get the disease. So what kind of feelings do they have when they experience this? Their life is meaningless after that. They can't be normal, have a normal life. So we should ask, audiences in universities, do you want to be like that? You want that kind of situation by the age of 20? Do you want to be in that situation? Wake up! Stop playing around with sex. It's a serious business. So we should really confront young people with this, to save their lives. They think it's a game, you know. But they should really understand it's serious business. In far more ways than disease alone. You know, we know from spirit world what it's like, what goes on in the spirit world, in hell, for fornicators, right? Just talking about disease alone is scary, but it's much worse in the spirit world. So we have to save people from this kind of situation. Also, increases among, it's also same age group of girls in pregnancies. So sexual freedom was actually a lie. It was not freedom. Is a 20-year-old girl who could never have a baby of her own a free person? She's not free to have a child. She's not free also in marrying, because maybe nobody wants to marry her. So is she really free? Was that sex free? Not at all. It came with a big price, which she'll regret for the rest of her life. When she goes to spirit world, will she be free? No. She goes to hell. So we have to really point these things out. You know, in the 1950s, the two most commonly known sexually transmitted diseases were syphilis and gonorrhea. And there were others, but they were confined almost exclusively to the sexual community, the prostitute community. So there were very few broadly spread sexually transmitted diseases. But today, we have a very different situation in 2004. These are either direct sexual diseases or diseases that are spread easily among promiscuous people. So it's like walking through a minefield. If somebody wants to have a sexual relationship today, they're like walking through a minefield. You know, in some African countries, one African country actually is Swaziland, I believe, 35% of the population has AIDS. 35%, over 1/3 of the people. It's dangerous to get involved sexually with anybody in such a situation. And people are not in the habit of confessing their sins before they want to get into a relationship. So actually we, also in Western society, which means here also, same problem is developing. It is actually dangerous to one's health to become promiscuous. And so the most commonly known STD right now, probably in the world, is HIV virus, which brings about AIDS. In 1980, the name HIV, or the word AIDS, acquired immune deficiency syndrome, were unknown. These words did not exist in 1980. Today, 24 years later, about 70 million have been estimated to have contracted this disease. That's more than most of your country's populations, right? So, 26 million have died. That's also more than many of your country's populations. All the Baltic states could be wiped out with that number. That's reality, actually. So the fact, we have to make it clear to everybody, the fact is there is no cure for AIDS. There is no cure. You will die if you get AIDS. So once you contract the HIV virus, you've got a death sentence. Make no mistake about it. You are sentenced to die. And there's nothing you can do about it. That's reality. So, again, we have to tell it straight. In many organizations, you know, they think, well, it's not polite to speak so straight, to show pictures, but this is nonsense. People's lives are at stake. They have to be told the truth and be warned and guided properly. So we have to say it like this. You will die if you get AIDS. I know members in the church who have died from AIDS. One used to work in Russia. He was an American brother. But he's gone in the spirit world. And you know Tom Wojcik, it's not him. Some of you know him, not him. Somebody else, you don't know him very well. So, this is reality. Also, even Father said one time that actually in our church people will be dying of AIDS because they violated principle. And so, what is really shocking in a way is the fact that this is the people that are confirmed as having AIDS are just the tip of the iceberg, just a small part of the big problem. And part of the reason for that is that many people who have the virus have no symptoms. They don't show any signs of having the disease. But you've seen the movie Titanic, right? Everybody was really having a wonderful time. But the ship was heading towards an iceberg. And they thought they had escaped it, but they hit the bottom of the ship and it sank. So, in some ways, it's like that with AIDS. So, in all of human history, actually, there has never been a problem, a plague as big as AIDS. It is the biggest plague in human history. There is no precedent for this. And that was only 24 years ago it began. And Father has said that over 90% of diseases and sicknesses come from the spiritual world. And it's interesting that at this time, when principle is revealing the cause of the human fall, that actually STDs such as AIDS are rampant in the world. And in a way scaring people because they're realizing I could die if I get myself involved sexually with somebody else. So people really are maybe becoming more and more aware. But actually, organizations like the UN, they don't talk about moral values. They don't talk about abstinence or purity or self-restraint or chastity. That is the one sure way that you can protect yourself against AIDS, right? Is remain faithful to moral principles and when you marry, to your spouse. That's one sure way to protect yourself. But yet nobody in governments or UN organizations are clearly saying this point. They don't have the moral courage to say so. Even they know it's true. But they just don't want to admit that maybe moral values are important in public policy. So, the primary way that HIV virus is transmitted is through sex with an infected partner. Secondary means include sharing drug needles, receiving contaminated blood, or birth to an infected mother. According to what I have heard, but I'm not sure this is correct scientifically, but I've heard that the HIV virus is apparently 450 times smaller than the human sperm. That can easily escape and cause death. Also people sharing drug needles. I was one time sitting in the bathroom in McDonald's restaurant in Tverskaya Street, nearby the criminal, nearby the post office area. And I was doing what I should be doing in the toilet. And then suddenly I heard when I looked, a needle rolled under into my cabin. There's a space on the floor. So somebody had just been injecting themselves with a needle, and then maybe they collapsed, and then the needle fell out of their hand and rolled into where I was sitting. So here was a needle with their blood and mixed with drugs, I'm sure. And I thought, really now, that was actually maybe almost 10 years ago, and I thought, really now, these problems have arrived in Russia. Right in front of my feet, I see them. This is reality also. So, sharing drug needles is one of the common ways that people spread the disease. Also, of course, there are innocent victims, like children or people who have received contaminated blood. These are tragedies. That happened in Kalmykia. There was a big problem there, a big scandal. Also, birth to an infected mother. This is another huge tragedy. Many of you here are or will be mothers. I'm sure that's a source of great pride for you, right? That you can say, I gave birth to a beautiful baby and it's like new life came from my body. What if you had to look at your child and know, I have given you death through my breast, through my blood. I gave you death. How would you feel? So the process here, first of all, a person gets infected with the virus. And for up to 5 years, more or less, there are no symptoms. There's no external sign that you have a deadly virus going through your blood system. And that is why it is so dangerous. You've heard of American basketball player, perhaps, Magic Johnson. Not Gunnar Johnson, but Magic Johnson. Right? Johnson, it's a little different, yeah? You've heard of him, right? I don't know if you follow basketball. Anyway, he was revealed in 1991 as he was HIV positive. He had to get a new insurance policy, health insurance policy. And in order to qualify, they had to have a blood test. And they told him, you have the HIV virus. He's a married man, he had a young daughter. And one time after a basketball match, he had sex with some prostitute. And he got the disease from her. So, from that moment on, how can he relate to his wife? First of all, it's revealed he betrayed his wife and his daughter. And so, for some time, people were saying, well, he's a good example because look at, he's so strong and so healthy. And even a few years later, in 1994, I believe, or 92, he went to Barcelona Olympics and he played with the American basketball team. And so people were looking at him, wow, this guy's got HIV, but look at how strong and healthy he is. Maybe it's not so bad after all. That was a big lie. A big lie. Why? Because he doesn't represent most people who get HIV virus. First of all, he himself was a world-class athlete. His original state of health was very strong, world-class. He's also a multi-millionaire. He can afford to pay for the expensive drugs which slow down but do not stop the virus. So even today he doesn't look too bad. But since he got it, millions of others have died who got it at the same time as he, because they didn't have the same situation. So he's not a good example of an AIDS patient. It's misleading if people believe that it's survivable. It's not. You die. And so, after some years, symptoms begin to appear. There are many different symptoms. Often it looks just like a normal cold. Runny nose, red eyes. You know, some of you on MFT might look like that sometimes. You know? But don't worry, I don't think you have a problem. You're working too hard. Right? So don't get overly worried. But anyway, these symptoms begin to appear. And so, what is normally a survivable sickness becomes a deadly disease. Something like pneumonia. Because your body has no defense. So what begins to happen? When the virus attacks, goes into your bloodstream, it focuses on the white blood cells. White blood cells, as you understand from any pimple that ever appears in your face, are the cells that protect your body against bacteria. Their job is to attack invaders and to destroy, expel any disease coming into your body. But what the HIV virus does, it actually latches onto the white blood cell. It uses the white blood cell as a host, and it becomes a parasite, taking nourishment from the white blood cell and multiplying itself many times. And so what happens, white blood cells go down in number, and then virus increase in number. And there is a change. You know. And around the time the balance changes, then you begin to notice. And it's still a mystery how they actually multiply themselves. That's one of the mysteries of AIDS. And so even though they have found, some kind of medicine to try to slow it down or whatever, but even now they're concluding, actually they're just as far away today as they were 20 years ago from finding a cure. Because every time they develop what they think is a cure, suddenly the HIV virus mutates into a new form, which counteracts that medicine. So actually they're still nowhere near finding a cure for AIDS. But even if they found a cure, what would the response of people be? They think, oh great, now we can go back again and have a lot of promiscuous sex. Is that what will happen? Maybe God will not allow a cure to be found. Because the point is people have to start behaving morally and not creating the conditions whereby it spreads. And so, at this point, again I repeat, there is no cure for AIDS. If you get AIDS, you die. Simple as that. Finally, after the full-blown AIDS sets in, the person will die. So, most people who contract AIDS, over 80% or 90% of people who contract the HIV virus will be dead within 10 years. So if there are 70 million or so infected, where will they be in 10 years from now? In the grave. They'll be dead. So we have to look into the eyes of students and say to them, you can be dead in 10 years if you play around. And contraceptives won't save you either, as we'll explain later. So we have to really let them know. They might not like what you say, they might think you're being fanatic, but if you save their lives, they'll be very grateful to you. There are a lot of people who, would wish they had heard these things before, and they would have acted very differently than they are now. So one of the ways a person dies is through an acute form of pneumonia. Pneumonia is a curable disease. It's uncomfortable and it's inconvenient, but it's curable. And so here we have an X-ray of a person whose chest is clear. They are a healthy person. But on this side, it's a big mess. And what happens is a liquid begins to form inside the lungs. And normally the body will fight it and expel it, because it's not supposed to be there. But in the case of an AIDS patient, their immune system is so destroyed because their white blood cells are reduced so much, it cannot expel this liquid. So what happens to this person? They choke to death. That's it. And all they can do is wait for that to happen. Oftentimes people who contract the HIV virus are people who have behaved promiscuously, or they are on drugs. So they are more likely to catch other diseases as well, other sexual diseases. And one of these is a very severe form of herpes. And so these are herpes sores. And what happens here? The herpes sores open up in the body, and because the body can't cure itself, it doesn't develop a skin again. They're just like open sores all over their body. They cannot sit comfortably, they cannot lie comfortably. In the end, they can't even wear clothes comfortably. It's too painful. What a way to die. But yet that's the way many AIDS patients die, actually. Often they have a whole series, several different sexual diseases attacking their body at the same time. So they're like rotting away. Imagine the physical pain and discomfort, but also the mental anguish of such a person. And how much regret they must feel about their actions. I wish I had not behaved this way. I wish I had gone a different direction in my life. Now I'm 20 years old and I'm dying of this. We should really have compassion and indignation even for that kind of situation. And have a desire to save people from that. And we also have responsibility. We know the spirit about the spirit world. So we should be really active in saving people from this kind of situation. And there are thousands, now becoming millions of Russians in this situation. And the same is true in Ukraine, Estonia, all these countries. Increasing numbers of people are caught in this situation. They are brothers and sisters. We have to save them and give them new hope. Also, there are many innocent victims of the problem of STDs. It includes babies, like I mentioned, who are affected by their mothers. They have no chance in life at all. How unjust it seems to be. What does God feel about that? So every year it is estimated that around 350,000 babies are born infected with this disease. Completely innocent of the situation, yet they pay the price for their parents' mistakes. They don't get a chance in life. Also, there are innocent spouses. Husband or wife is unfaithful, and they bring into the home a disease. They infect their spouse. You know, in China, when we give these lectures, we really scare Chinese people, actually. Because China has a one family, one child policy. Among Han Chinese, they only allow one child because of keeping the population reduced. So what happens in a Chinese family, or any family that has only one child? If the husband is unfaithful, for example, he contracts the HIV virus, comes home, has a relationship with his wife, she contracts the disease, she passes it on to her child in the womb. Well, that family is dead. The husband will die, the wife will die, and the child will die. And that family is wiped out. In China, it's already happening. In South China, near the Vietnamese border, we've been there, we've given lectures there, we've met AIDS committee leaders and all kinds of people there. And they told us, honestly, it's true what you're saying. Actually, it's already happening. Whole families are being wiped out. That's reality. Due to drug, infection through drug needles, and also through promiscuous behavior. So there are many innocent victims. Also in Africa, again, you can check these statistics through the internet on UN-AIDS. They give updates every year. The website explains how many orphans are now in Africa as a result of the AIDS plague. Millions of orphans. So many African children only have their grandmother to take care of them, or grandparents. And now they're burdened, old people taking care of young children, because both parents have died. And many times the children the grandparents are taking care of are themselves infected, and they're waiting to die too. So it's really a serious problem, really a scary, sad situation. People think disease is the biggest problem of, promiscuous sex. A lot of the emphasis is about medical problems and diseases. But, that's not even the only problem associated with this, as you know. There are other problems, and these include psychological harm. Spiritual damage which is done when people violate principle and behave in a promiscuous fashion. Also, what kind of social problems occur as a result of the breakdown in moral behavior among people? What kind of social problems occur? So again, I will not go into all the details, but just mention a few. And in the complete lecture series, which you can get, there are many more statistics mentioned. But I just want to give you an introduction. This is actually, points are from a paper which was prepared and presented by Dr. Thomas Lickona, whom I mentioned earlier, this man who is considered the father of American character education. He issued a paper called The Neglected Heart in 1994. And he's a professor at a university in New York State. And he did research among students where he frankly asked them, those who had sexual relationships, before getting married, what was their feeling? What kind of experiences did they have? So he did very big research among thousands of students. And in America, actually generally people are not shy about telling it like it is and saying, yeah, I did have this relationship and this is the result. So they're quite straightforward in answering what they think. And he was surprised to find, of course, some of them answered, well, yeah, it was a great experience and I loved it, it was wonderful. But actually he was surprised how many expressed negative feelings about after their sexual experience. So things like heartbreak and regret. They really regretted that they had this relationship. Some felt that they felt more love and genuine friendship with this person before the relationship than after the relationship. They felt something changed in the relationship once we had sex, before being committed to each other in marriage. And somehow they regretted this. Also, those who had a commitment either to themselves or their parents to maintain their purity, they felt a sense of guilt and shame Some who were religious thought that, of course, also. Also, he discovered that it tended to stunt, to slow down or stop the development of the people's personality and character. Why is this? Well, part of the reason is that sex is such a powerfully attractive experience that if a young person starts getting involved, it's like an addiction. They feel an addiction, they need to have sexual contact. And they cannot stop. And so instead of focusing on studying, instead of focusing on developing qualities in their character, which are much more important for successful marriage, they are playing this game with sex. It's like a game to satisfy their desire. So they're focusing only on these things. They're neglecting studies, they're neglecting developing other qualities in their character. And so they're actually stunted, they're stopped growing, if you like, internally. Also, he found out that many had a fear of commitment after this. In some cases, he found that actually it was often girls had this experience. And some psychologists say that a woman is affected more by what she hears, through the ear. The tone of voice or the words used have a bigger effect on a woman than a man. A man is more affected through the eyes and accordingly stimulated. So sometimes a woman wants friendship and kindness and understanding, but a man is maybe motivated by a more lustful desire. So they're on different levels. They are not communicating the same level. And so then the woman feels afterwards, I just wanted kindness, but he wanted sex. It's not. It's obvious, it's true though. Sometimes men are not seeking sex, and women are. But in many cases, the woman is more concerned about spiritual element of the relationship. And then feels betrayed, when he pressured her to have sex. And she feels, next time a man looks at me and smiles and shows kindness, can I trust him? Maybe he's really motivated by lust. Maybe that's not a genuine smile. Maybe that's temptation, seduction. So, can I trust? So trust and the feeling to commit is destroyed. Also, many students said they would be ready to tell lies to get sexual favors. Also a sense of rage at betrayal. They feel I was betrayed. And even, of course, depression, in some cases suicide. There are many stories of young people, they were cheated by the person they thought loved them, but then just walked away. They're so depressed, they kill themselves. Also, another problem about having sex outside marriage is, before marriages, is comparisons to past partners. And one example I use in lectures, which everybody can understand, is Prince Charles and Princess Diana, right? When they were married in 1981, it was, the title in all the papers was Wedding of the Century. But how did that wedding of the century end up? She died in a car accident in Paris with her lover. She's the mother of the future King of England. That's how she died. And before she died, I was watching an interview that she gave on TV, shortly before she died, where she told honestly everything. And she admitted that she herself, when she was hurt by her husband, she had a sexual relationship with the person who was training her how to ride horses. Some very handsome gentleman. Then she said in this interview, Charles and I would have made a great team. We could have done great things together. But there was always a third person in this relationship. Camilla, her name was Camilla. So Charles had a relationship with this woman before he got married, and he couldn't forget her, and couldn't put her away. And so he brought that into the marriage with him, right? And Diana found this, surely. But she didn't solve it by having a relationship also. So that's a big tragedy, actually. This is supposed to be like a model, role models for the British people, right? And it was looked up as almost like idyllic, beautiful how cool, Charles is not that handsome actually, but anyway, he's a prince. He's not a handsome one, but he's a prince, right? But how tragic, that story. And this is, you talk about the parents of the future king of the country. So that's an example, that is very clear, where he couldn't separate from his past. Also, infidelity results when people are promiscuous before marriage. Actually, people think I can just switch off this habit. Maybe I can play around before marriage, but then when I get married, I'll stop. But everybody knows, even simple habits are difficult to overcome. The sexual habit is extremely difficult to control. And if a person has developed the wrong habit in this area, it's practically impossible for them to keep their marriage together. And so much of the divorce, it comes because of infidelity. And of course, I mentioned already about bringing STDs, sexually transmitted diseases, into the family. Also, social problems linked to sex outside marriage. Pornography is a multi-billion-dollar business. Prostitution, of course, a huge problem. Increase of rape. Children born out of wedlock. In America, children born outside of marriage, they make up 75% of young people in drug rehabilitation centers in America. 75%. They also make up 75% of young people in prisons in America. Because they don't feel their value, and many times the child is born not because they were wanted. In fact, the spirit is, this is an unwanted child. Domestic violence is also more prevalent among those who are promiscuous or unfaithful. And of course, family breakdown is a natural consequence. So actually, the sexual revolution, what did it actually do? It created a culture of uncommitted sex. We destroyed the innocence of children. I'm now worried even with my son Nikolai. He's just 9 years old. I can't let him watch TV because even between children's programs on Russian television, we don't have cable. We can't even bring cable into our home. But just normal broadcast TV in the evening, sometimes between Russian children's programs, there's some videos so sexually explicit. So I just switch off completely and only show videos that we choose. We have to almost live in a monastery now to protect children. That's reality also. And so we need a new ethic of love and sexuality. And so, having explained to people, about the seriousness of the problem, and believe me, we haven't explained all the details here. This is half the lecture. We should really get people awakened. You can't ignore this problem. It is a rot in society. It's a cancer destroying society. And must be confronted. And who can confront it? Only true parents can deal with this. And we are representing them. So we have to now come up with some clear answers. So already you heard many things this morning from Dr. Suk, and I'll be repeating some of those things. So there is a new need for an ethic of love and sexuality. We need a new philosophy which will clarify for young people. What is the meaning of love? What is the meaning of sexuality? What kind of vision do you have for your future? If you just come to young people and say, don't go there, you'll get AIDS. Young people don't like to be talked down to. They need to be talked to intelligently. Also, they need to be trusted as well. If you come and think, young people are always making mistakes, they won't listen to you. So we have to speak to them intelligently. We have to speak to them lovingly, seriously, and at the same time with a vision of what marriage and love and sexuality can be. So they feel, I want to wait for this experience. It's worth waiting until I'm committed to somebody before engaging in sexual love. So we, as our movement, we have a responsibility to educate people about the true meaning of sex and really tear down this false concept of free sex. That's our job. No UN, no organization can do this. They don't know the meaning of sexuality. Only through principle we understand. We understand it's the cause of the fall. We understand what it means from God's point of view. Therefore, we are responsible to teach people the truth about this and awaken them to the new vision of love and sexuality. This is very important. So you heard this morning already that animals have sexual relationships, and it's based on instinctual issues, physical and instinctual, and totally for reproduction. So they don't have the decision. Their instinctual nature switches on and off. However, human beings are always online, if I want to use a modern expression. And therefore, it's on the one hand a blessing, on the other hand it's a responsibility. Responsibility to utilize love in the proper way. So it's both physical and instinctual, it's emotional, it has a social component, and of course it's a moral question. There's a famous song, by Tina Turner, I think. What's love got to do with it? You know that song? It's a kind of attitude, Well, love has nothing to do with it. But actually it's got everything to do with it. You heard already, we have a responsibility towards our conscience. Our conscience is affected by how our mind-body unity is going on. Which is dominant in our life? Is my body the dominating factor? Or is my conscience, my spirit, my values, my ethics, are they the predominant aspect of my life? Also, my spouse. I am committed to my spouse. I have a responsibility to keep my commitment. She or he is trusting me to keep my commitment. I owe it to them to keep my commitment. And if I'm not yet married, then I have the responsibility to prepare for that time. So think about this. One example I sometimes use about this issue is, when people get married, they work day and night sometimes to think about, okay, so I'm going to get married on this day, so I need this clothes, I need this car, I need this hotel, we need to invite these people, and send out these invitations. And they think all about the wedding, but how much do they think about the marriage? What comes after the wedding? How much preparation did you make for the rest of your married life? You made a lot of preparation for your wedding day. Like Prince and Princess in England. But how much preparation did you make for the rest of your married life after the wedding day? How well did you prepare? And one thing I mention sometimes is, what is the greatest gift you can give to your spouse when you get married? Pure love, right? Supposing you come to your spouse, right? And you give them a very beautiful ring with a huge diamond, right? But then somehow they find out, actually that's the third person that's wearing this diamond ring. They're the third one. You gave it to another woman before, and you took it back, and now you gave it to this one, and then finally to the third. How would they feel when they look at that ring? They feel, of course, it's still physically valuable, but internally it is dirty, it is stained. Right? Or think about if you give a box of chocolates to somebody, and it's in a beautiful wrapping, so nice paper, and beautiful, expensive Swiss chocolates, or maybe Latvian. I think Latvia has nice chocolates. Then you present it, and then they, oh, thank you so much, and then you open the box, and there's 2 chocolates missing. So somehow, of course, they love chocolate, maybe they want to eat them, but they feel inside, it's stained with your failure to control yourself. You couldn't resist taking 2 chocolates before you gave it as a gift. So what about love? Do you want to give new or used love? New. So actually the love experience should be first time. So to be able to look into your spouse's eyes and say, I overcame temptation. I practiced self-restraint. I resisted all kinds of temptation for you. Because I was waiting for you. That's romantic, isn't it? I think so. That's the way it should be. So we should teach young people this idealism. Have a a vision, to wait for such a moment. Practice self-restraint. It's not about fighting diseases. That's just another issue. It's about building a beautiful family. Creating an ideal that you can be proud of and that your children can be proud of. That's what it's really about. So we should think about, how do I one day unite with my spouse in love? How can I prepare? Also, how about my children? Every child would like to know that my mommy and daddy really loved each other and they wanted me to be born. And so they trust their parents. So again, they should feel a sense of responsibility towards their future children. And if they have children today, if they're tempted outside their marriage, they should think, look at their child's picture. Could I look at my child in the eye and watch him do what I'm going to do? If my child was looking at what I'm doing now, how would I feel? We should tell young people this point. Think about these things. You can carry your family picture. And so, as you heard also, there are many components to sex: love, life, lineage, and conscience. In other words, again, if we explain the vision of this relationship, and people realize it's the most sacred, most holy, most beautiful thing, truly is worth waiting for a committed relationship to experience this sexual love, then young people will be inspired. And young people's sense of original mind actually is much stronger. When you talk to young people, they react much more easily because they're less corrupted internally, being young. So we should speak with that awareness also, that really believe in them and trust them when you talk to them, that they will listen to what you say. Don't speak to them with the thinking, oh, they're all going to go out and commit sin. No, think the opposite. Think really, I know you will understand this. And then people really will. They really will respond. Sometimes we just don't trust, and this is one of the problems also with society, is that they have lost trust in young people. And if adults don't trust young people, then young people think, well, what's the point in trying to live up to an ideal if I'm not trusted anyway? So they need to be trusted also. At the same time, they need protective knowledge about love, understanding what is the difference between infatuation and maturing love, building long-lasting love relationship of love. Things like commitment also. And what are the challenges? They should understand. It is not as rosy as it appears in the movies or in books. Real love means sacrifice and challenge. And so they should understand the path to true love. And that they can find joy. The goal ultimately is joy. They will find joy, but not in a superficial way. It is going through the growth process of love. Also, they should have protective knowledge about sexuality. All the issues, today maybe they worry about the disease, but there are many other issues, like I explained. Emotional, psychological, and we know spiritual. Also, what is the relationship between sex and love? Also the mental and relation consequences of premature sex, as well as being told clearly it is right and it is good to control your sexual urges. Actually, one of the problems in Western society is that the concept, which is from the psychoanalyst Freud, right? Sigmund Freud, one of his ideas, which is very popular and still in many countries popular, is that it is unhealthy, mentally unhealthy, to control sexual urges. So the advice that many young people get today in Western society is, if you cannot control, then give in to it. Release that pressure. And you can choose which is the best way to release that pressure. So they're not being told, actually, you can control it, you can dominate it. So the whole society is actually encouraging people to fall and to destroy themselves morally and even physically. And of course, one of the reasons why that's happening is because many of the leaders giving such advice or leading such organizations are themselves morally corrupt. They're the product of the 60s. We had the last US President Clinton, right? He was a product of the 60s. And so then the leadership does not have the moral conviction, because they themselves have failed, and they don't feel the conviction then to talk and guide others. But in order to help young people, it needs to be done. And so we're starting a revolution! Right? A new revolution! That is the absolute sex ethic revolution. Right? Yes! And we're coming against the sexual revolution. Face on, right? So we're going to destroy that concept. That's Father's goal. That's the fall of man. Confronting the fall of man. Make no mistake about it. And so what is the free sex ethic? Self-gratification. If you feel like it, do it. That's the slogan. Even Nike uses such a slogan, this shoe company. Self-gratification, multiple sexual partners. And so absolute sex ethic is true love, one lifetime spouse. And again, there are many more details which, because of time, we can't go into. Also, pledge of abstinence. Young people can be encouraged to make a pledge, a serious pledge. And it does have a strong effect. We think, just reading a piece of paper and doing a ceremony and then they forget. Actually, it is more than that for many young people. I'm sure Marina Zhushkova can probably tell you, from her experience about that he's saving their lives, physically and spiritually. Okay? Now, my other job, MC. So, thank you.